We are now introducing a subject that has always been difficult to understand, even for those who have advanced to a certain degree of mystery wisdom. In the ancient mysteries, one sought to make it comprehensible in the following way. At a particular stage of initiation into the ancient mysteries, the neophyte was led into the presence of hostile powers who had a cruel and horrible appearance, and who performed the most dreadful acts before the eyes of the neophyte. Those who did these things were none other than masked priests, masked sages. To bring about the necessary temptations, priests disguised themselves in ghastly demonic forms as dreadful beings, performing the most terrible acts that one could possibly imagine. Why was this done? Why did the initiate, the priest, bring before the neophyte the guise of the wrongdoer, the mask of evil? To show the neophyte how far development could err from the right path. Actually, let me read that again, it wasn't a question. To show the neophyte how far development could err from the right path. The neophyte was supposed to have the illusion of standing face to face with evil. Only when the unmasking occurred did the neophyte see the truth. The illusion was removed. Only then did the neophyte know that this scene was a means of creating a trial or test. To strengthen and arm the neophyte against it, evil was presented in its most hideous forms by priests who, of course, did not err. This was merely a reflection of something that actually took place in cosmic evolution. During the period between the Jupiter and Mars stages of development, if I may express it somewhat trivially, a host of beings from the sphere of the dynamis or mites were countermanded. Instead of acting as progressive influences, they were placed in the course of development to cause obstacles. We have come to know this as the war in heaven. The actions of these adversely commanded mites, to coin a phrase, were thrown across the path of development, for the ruling cosmic powers of the hierarchies said to themselves that if the path were smooth, what was intended to come into existence could never arise. Something greater must arise. Now suppose that you wish to push a cart, and because you push it forward, your powers of strength develop to a certain extent. If you loaded the cart with heavy freight, you would have to push harder, but you would also develop greater strength. Suppose that the Godhead had permitted cosmic evolution to take its course up to and beyond the Jupiter stage. Humankind certainly could have developed well, but could become even stronger if obstacles were put in its path. For the good of humanity, therefore, certain mites had to receive adverse commands. They were not evil to begin with. One need not regard them as evil forces. Rather, one could say that they sacrificed themselves in order to place an obstacle in the path of development. These mites may therefore be called the gods of hindrance, or gods of impediment in the broadest sense of the word. These are gods of obstructions or hindrances that have been placed along the path of development, and ever since that moment the possibility was created for everything that was to be accomplished in the future. These countermanded dynamis were not yet evil in themselves. On the contrary, by running up against the normal course of development, they were the great promoters of evolution. Nevertheless, they were the originators of evil, because out of the storms they produced, evil gradually arose. The course of development for the adversely commanded mites took a very different form from that of their fellows. The effect of their activity was very different, and as a result, during the development of the moon, these mites became the tempters of the beings we call angels. During the evolutionary stage of the moon, the angels were passing through their human phase. There were angel humans on the moon who witnessed the effect of these obstacles on the course of development. They said to themselves, "We can now allow ourselves to assail these hindrances. We can plunge into the stream of the moon's development, but we prefer to abstain. We do not want to plunge in, but choose to remain above with the good gods." These angel beings, at a particular point during the course of the moon stage of development, tore themselves away from the mites, who, down below, had introduced obstacles into the development of the moon. But there were other angel humans on the moon who said, "We will not follow our fellows, because if we did, the pattern of development would be turned around and nothing new would happen." Indeed, just because the hindrances were present, from the development of the moon stage on, something new was introduced. There were beings who said, "We wish to have absolutely nothing to do with what is happening down there. We remain with the mites, who do not wish to be touched by the lesser." These beings withdrew from the moon mass during the development of the old moon and became followers of everything that occurred in the sun. They wanted nothing to do with what happened on the moon, which had been cast aside because the hindrances were present. The others who plunged down, however, had to take into their bodily nature everything they had received of the existing developmental hindrances on the moon. They had to harden themselves more than otherwise would have been the case. Their bodily sheaths became denser than they would have been, and they bore the consequence of the actions of the mites in their bodies. We should remember, however, that the deeds of the mites or dunamis were well-founded within the divine cosmic plan. A further consequence of all this was that when the development of the moon passed over into that of the earth, the whole process was in a certain way repeated. These beings who hurled themselves into the full tide of the moon development lagged behind those who would have nothing to do with it. Still others remained even further behind because they were attracted by the retrograde development. All of this, therefore, led to the presence of two sorts of angel humans during the development of the earth. Some of the angel humans were those who had gone ahead, and some were those who had stayed behind. The advanced angel humans now set to work on humanity in the Lemurian time, as humankind became mature enough to receive the seed of the human eye capital. They gave human beings the option, so to speak, of ascending immediately into spiritual worlds and having no more to do with what had mingled with the course of cosmic evolution since the moon phase of development. The beings who had stayed behind, whom we call Luciferic beings, went to work on the human astral body. They could not reach the eye, and injected the results of the war in heaven into the astral body. As the mites were countermanded into participation in the war in heaven and became gods of hindrance, the consequences of their actions crept into the human astral body, where they had a different and greater significance, for there they represent the possibility of error and the possibility of evil. Human beings were thus given the possibility of error and the possibility of evil, but at the same time they also received the capacity to rise above error and evil by their own strength. Consider that beings such as the mites or dunamis, belonging to the second hierarchy, did not have the possibility at all of becoming evil by themselves. They had to be adversely commanded. Only the beings of the third hierarchy, the angels who are closest to human beings, could follow or not follow the hindering mites. Those who did not succumb are represented in pictures depicting the victories fought out in the heavens. They are supposed to express what came to pass during the moon stage of development, when human beings had advanced to the incarnation of the astral body, that is, to the human animal stage. The angel beings who remained pure, as it were, tore themselves away from the course of the moon development. They escaped what was taking place below on the moon. This picture is represented in many different forms before our souls. Originally, we find it depicted in the battle between Michael and the dragon. Footnote, Revelations 12, see also Steiner, the Archangel Michael, his mission and ours. End of footnote. We also find it expressed with great clarity in pictures of the Mithraic bull. But the object of such representations was not to say that these angel beings have forsaken their duty. They were intended to depict an ideal for the future. These beings, it was said, preferred to ascend into spiritual worlds. You, on the other hand, have descended, along with other beings who followed the powers of hindrance. It is now up to you to work through what you have taken in and carry it upward into the spiritual world. On the upward path you are called on to become a Michael and a conqueror of the bull. A symbol such as this must be interpreted in this twofold way. So we see that humanity received the possibility of reaching its goal by its own powers, something that even the seraphim cannot attain through their own endeavors, only because the mites were given adverse orders. That is the most significant fact. The seraphim, cherubim, and thrones cannot do anything but follow the immediate impulses given them by the Godhead. The dominions, indeed the whole of the second hierarchy, must do likewise. Only among the ranks of the mites were some commanded adversely. They could also not do other than follow the orders of the Godhead when they threw themselves across the path of development. Even in causing what could be called the source of evil, they merely performed the will of the Godhead. By making themselves servants of evil, these mites accomplished the will of the Godhead, who wished to strengthen the good by means of the detour through evil. Let us now descend to the beings called powers, or exousiae. They likewise could not have become wicked by themselves, and the same applies to the spirits of personality, archai, and the fire spirits, the archangels. For when the latter passed through their human stage on the sun, the mites had not yet been adversely commanded, and there was not yet any possibility of becoming evil. The first to have this possibility of becoming evil were the angels, because this possibility existed only since the moon stage of development. The war in heaven took place during the transition from the sun to the moon. A number of angels rejected this possibility, refused to be seduced, so to speak, by the powers destined to introduce hindrances. They remained true to their former nature, so that we have, down to the angels, and also among some of the angels, beings of the higher hierarchies who cannot do anything but follow the divine will. This is most important. We come now to two categories of beings. First, there are those angels who hurled themselves into what the mites had brought about during the war in heaven. These are beings who, on account of their later deeds, are called Luciferic beings. They went to work on the human astral body during earthly evolution and introduced the possibility of evil, but also the possibility of developing oneself through one's own free activity. Thus, in the whole range of the hierarchies, it is only among a portion of the angels and among human beings that we find the possibility of freedom. The possibility of freedom begins within the ranks of the angels, but it is fully developed only in humanity. When humanity came down to earth, human beings first had to fall prey to the mighty power of the Luciferic hosts. These hosts permeated the human astral body with their powers, so that the I became enmeshed in this field of forces. During the Lemurian and Atlantean periods, and also subsequently, we find the I wrapped in a cloud caused by Lucifer's influences. The human being was saved from being overpowered by these debilitating forces only because earlier beings, the angels who had remained above, and the archangels, overshadowed the person and incarnated in the individuals chosen to guide humanity. This continued until the time when something remarkable happened. A being who had previously always been united with the sun's existence advanced so far that he could not only penetrate the human being's physical, etheric, and astral bodies, as previously had been the situation with higher beings, but could also permeate the human being as far as the eye. You will recall that I described how higher beings descended during former times and ensouled human physical, etheric, and astral bodies. Now, at a special moment in time, an individual arose who had been chosen to receive the most exalted being into himself, a being who had been united with our sun existence and who now worked inspiringly into the I, even down into all the forces of the I. The I expresses itself through the blood. Just as the blood in its material substance is the expression of the I, so the warmth or fire of the blood, which is the remnant of the Saturn fire, is the expression of the I in the elements. This being had to express itself physically in a twofold way. In the element of fire, the being proclaimed himself to Moses in the burning bush and in the lightning on Mount Sinai. One and the same being could penetrate the human eye and speak to Moses from the burning bush and from the lightning and thunder on Mount Sinai. This being prepared his advent and then appeared in a blood-permeated body, that of Jesus of Nazareth. This Son being entered into an earthly individuality. Because the human eye will be filled and saturated more and more by the power that then penetrated it, this eye will become more and more capable of overcoming through its own forces all the influences that have the capacity to pull it down. For this being who penetrated the human eye is of a different nature from those other beings who formerly descended to earth and ensouled the physical, etheric, and astral bodies. Let us consider the ancient holy rishis. As we have seen, the spirit of a high being lived in their etheric bodies. Because the holy rishis had inherited the etheric body from great Atlantean ancestors in whom that exalted being had lived, it was passed on to them. But the rishis could not comprehend, with their eye and astral bodies, what streamed through the inspiration of their etheric bodies. And so it went from epoch to epoch. Human beings received inspiration. They always experienced something like a force within them when they were inspired. Inspiration was something that they captured, as it were, with a force. The individual withdrew somewhat from the ordinary human capacity to manage on one's own. So that one could improve, could advance, the person had to be inspired by a more perfect being. This was the situation for all founders of religions. Beings who had been exalted above the war in heaven were infused into the religious founders, so human beings were not left to depend just on their own resources. In the Christ, however, a being of very different nature appeared. He was a being who did absolutely nothing, who exerted not the slightest compulsion to bring people to him. This is the main point. If you consider the propagation of Christianity, you will find living evidence that during his lifetime Christ did not do what occurred in spreading Christianity. Consider the founders of religions of ancient times. They are the great teachers of humanity. From a certain moment in their development, they begin to instruct, and their teachings work on human beings with an overwhelming power. Now consider the Christ. Does the Christ actually work through his teachings? Anyone who thinks that Christ's main contribution lies in his teaching does not really understand the Christ. At least in the first instance, the Christ did not work through his teaching, but through what he did. And the greatest deed of the Christ was the deed that ended with his death. It was, in fact, his death. That is the most important point. Christ worked through a deed. And when knowledge of this action began to spread through the world, he was no longer physically present. That is the fundamental difference between the efficacy of Christ and that of other great founders of religions. This difference is hardly understood at all, but it is the most important one. All of the teachings of Christianity, everything that is preached in Christianity, every Christian teaching, you can describe, you can find in other religious systems. This cannot be denied. It can certainly be said that the essence of Christian teaching is also contained in other systems, but has Christianity been effective through the contents of its teaching? did the person who did the most in spreading Christianity rely on its teaching? Consider the Apostle Paul. Did he allow himself to be transformed from Saul to Paul by what is written in the Gospels? Paul persecuted the followers of Christ Jesus until the one who died on the cross appeared to him out of the clouds. That is, until Paul had his own personal occult experience of the fact that Christ lives. The effect of that death, the efficacy of that act, became the quickening impulse for Paul. And that is what matters. Other religious systems work through their teachings, and the teachings are the same as those found in Christianity. But in Christianity it is not a question of teachings. What matters is the deed that took place. The act of Christ only works on a person when one decides to allow it to have an effect. That is, when the deed is united with the absolutely free nature of the individual I. It is not enough for the Christ to be present in the human astral body. To be truly understood, Christ must be present in the I, and the I must freely resolve to receive the Christ. That is the point. But as a result of the I uniting itself with the Christ, this human I acquires within itself a reality, a divine power, not just a teaching. Therefore, it can be demonstrated 100 times that the teachings of Christianity may already be found here or there, but that is not the point. The essential aspect of Christianity is the act that can only be made one's own through a voluntary ascent into higher worlds. Human beings receive the power of Christ into themselves because they willingly accept it, and no one can receive it who does not voluntarily accept it. This has become possible for the human being only since the Christ became human on earth, since he was called on to become a human being on the earth. The fallen angels, who came to live on earth as Luciferic beings, are in a different position. Indeed, they should have become human on the moon, but they remained behind in the development. As a result, they can penetrate the astral body, but they cannot gain access to the I. They are in an unusual situation, which we can only represent graphically, even if that seems pedantic. Let's assume, leaving aside the etheric and physical bodies, that the astral body of the human being, during the Lemurian development, is represented by this circle. The I would then be encased within this astral body because it has gradually entered into the astral body. What happens next? During the Lemurian epoch, the Luciferic forces crept into the astral body from all sides and penetrated human beings with their activities. In human beings, these are expressed as lower passions. The possibility for human beings to succumb to error and evil is embedded in the astral body. The Luciferic spirits introduced that possibility into us. If they had not, we would never have had the possibility of erring, of doing evil. Instead, we would have been lifted up to a region where we would have received the I untouched by hindering influences. This is the situation. But the great leaders of humanity protected human beings so that we should not sink too low. Then the Christ event occurred. Let us take a human being who has voluntarily received the Christ. Of course, Christianity is only at its beginning, but let us take an ideal situation. A human I, in complete free will, has allowed the power of Christ to flow in. When the I has advanced so far that it is permeated by the Christ, then the power of Christ irradiates the astral body and streams into the actions of the Luciferic powers that had been injected into it. And what will happen in the future? Because with Christ's help, and only with his help, we can extinguish those qualities in us that stem from Lucifer, at the same time we can also gradually release the Luciferic powers. The time will come when the Luciferic powers, which had to sink to a lower stage of evolution for the sake of human freedom, and therefore could not experience the power of Christ on earth, will experience the power of Christ through human beings, and so will be redeemed. Human beings will redeem Lucifer if they receive the Christ power in the appropriate way. As a result, human beings will grow stronger than they would have been otherwise. Imagine, if human beings had not received the Luciferic forces, the Christ power would have streamed forth, but would not have encountered any Luciferic obstacles. It would have been impossible for us to progress in goodness, truth, and wisdom to the degree that we now can, once we have to overcome these countervailing forces. The human being is one of the hierarchies, but distinct from the others. Human beings are different from seraphim, cherubim, and thrones, dominions, mights, powers, spirits of personality, fire spirits, and from some of the angels as well. Looking into the future, a human being can say, I am called to seek the impulse for my actions in the deepest recesses of my own inner being, not out of the contemplation of the Godhead, as the seraphim do, for instance, but out of my own inner being. The Christ is a God who does not work in such a way that his impulses have to be followed. One follows the Christ only out of understanding and freedom. The Christ is the God who never seeks to hinder the free individual development of the I in this or that direction. The Christ could say in the profoundest sense, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And the beings of the next hierarchy, who had the possibility of doing evil, the Luciferic beings, will again be redeemed and freed through the power of human beings. Thus we see that cosmic development does not simply repeat itself. New factors enter in. A human stage, such as that experienced by human beings, was not to be found previously among the angels, archangels, or primal beginnings. Humanity has a completely new mission to fulfill in the world, the mission we have just characterized. Humanity descended into the earthly world in order to accomplish this mission. Christ came into the world as the free helper of humanity, not as a God working from above, but as the firstborn among many. Only in this way can we grasp the full dignity and importance of humankind among the members of the hierarchies. Looking up to the exalted nature and glory of the higher hierarchies, we can say to ourselves, however mighty, wise, and good these higher hierarchies may be, and hence unable to err from the true path, it is humanity's great mission to bring freedom into the world, and along with freedom what we call, in the truest sense of the word, love. For without freedom, love is impossible. Beings who absolutely must obey a particular impulse merely do so. But for those who can do otherwise, there is only one power that enables them to do so, and that is love. Freedom and love are two poles that belong together. If love is to enter our cosmos, it can do so only through freedom. That is, through Lucifer, and the one who conquers Lucifer, the one who is also the Redeemer of human beings, the Christ. That is why the earth is the cosmos of love and freedom, and it is important that without wishing to tempt human beings away from humility, we should learn to familiarize ourselves with the sequence of the hierarchies, as this has always been known in the esotericism of the West. Seraphim, cherubim, and thrones obey the direct impulses transmitted under the gaze of the Godhead. The dominions, mights, and powers are still so closely bound up with the higher powers that they have to receive countermands so that the development of humanity can move forward. Even the archangels and the spirits of personality cannot err. They cannot sink into evil of their own free resolve. The hierarchies immediately above humanity were called messengers and arch-messengers, to indicate that they were not accomplishing their own tasks, but merely fulfilling orders received from above. But humanity is a hierarchy that is gradually maturing so that it will carry out its own tasks. Throughout the development of Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan, human beings will mature gradually toward the accomplishment of their own impulses. Even if this goal is still distant today, in time humanity will attain it. What are the hierarchies? We begin with the seraphim, cherubim, and thrones. They exercise their authority by carrying out the impulse received from the gods. Then come the mights, who owe their strength to what is received from above, and the same is true of the powers. Were they to become evil, they could do so only as a result of a decision of the divine world. And now we come to the spirits of personality and the arch-messengers and messengers who descend to the immediate proximity of humanity. How should humanity be integrated into the ranks of the hierarchies? After the archangels and angels, arch-messengers and messengers, we must place among the hierarchical ranks those we may call the spirits of freedom or the spirits of love. Counting from above downward, this is the 10th hierarchy. This 10th hierarchy, although still in the process of development, nevertheless belongs to the spiritual hierarchies. It is not just a matter of repetition in the universe. Each time a cycle has been completed, a new element is introduced into cosmic evolution, and the integration of the new element is always the task of the hierarchy that is at its human stage of development. In these lectures, we have endeavored to fathom the meaning and significance of humanity by considering the significance of our cosmos. Today, to some extent at least, we have raised the spiritual question of the significance of the human being, and we have tried to establish the significance of the human being, the point at the center of the universe, according to the teachings of the mysteries. In so doing, we tried to solve the riddle of the center, the human being, from the periphery, the riddle of the point from the perspective of the circumference. In doing so, we place our knowledge within the sphere of reality. This is the essential point, that true spiritual scientific knowledge is also real concrete knowledge. In other words, spiritual scientific knowledge itself directly produces a picture of the cosmos and the spiritual hierarchies. We are at the center of our universe. Everything around us loses its significance because we have to acknowledge that the outer sense-perceptible world cannot solve the riddles that confront us. It is as if everything were concentrated at a single point. But just as everything compresses together, the solution of the cosmic riddle comes back from the periphery, as powerfully real as matter itself, which is a reflection and image of the spiritual. Matter gathers itself together, disappears at the center, and reappears at the periphery. That is reality. Our knowledge is real when it steps in front of our eyes as the structure and process of the entire cosmos. Such knowledge is no longer a form of speculation, a weaving of fanciful theory, for such knowledge is born out of the cosmos. This is the feeling we should develop. Wisdom must become an ideal for us, born out of the periphery of the cosmos and capable of filling us with great strength, with the strength that enables us to fulfill our own destiny and to achieve our own cosmic ideal. With this strength we shall also be able to realize the human ideal that awaits us in the future.